A small piece of stamped paper sits on a desk in colonial America. It looks harmless. A seal, a fee, a rule from across the ocean. But to the people who had to use it, the stamp carried a sharper question. Who gets to make rules for a life they do not have to live? After the French and Indian War, Britain controlled a larger empire and faced the cost of defending it. Parliament looked across the Atlantic and saw colonies that should help pay. The colonists saw taxes made by a legislature where they had no elected voice of their own. That was the first fuse, not the price of the paper, but the distance of the power. In 1765, the Stamp Act put a tax on printed materials, newspapers, legal documents, official forms, even playing cards. Printers, lawyers, merchants, and buyers could feel the law in their hands. The protest became physical fast. Crowds in streets, merchants refusing imports, and stamped paper left untouched. The slogan was simple enough for a tavern wall: no taxation without representation. Britain repealed the Stamp Act, but Parliament insisted it still had authority over the colonies in all cases. That kept the wound open. New taxes followed on imported goods like glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. In Boston, soldiers stood in streets where political anger made every uniform feel like a warning. In 1770, gunfire outside the customs house killed 5 colonists. The Boston Massacre did not start the revolution by itself, but it turned distrust into memory. In 1773, colonists destroyed tea in Boston Harbor to resist a system where a parliamentary tax remained and the East India Company received a privileged path to market. Tea was the object in the water. Authority was the argument underneath it. Britain answered with punishment. Boston's port closed, Massachusetts' self-government was restricted, and royal control expanded. The message was meant to restore order. Instead, it taught people across the colonies that one town's punishment could become every colony's future. In 1774, delegates gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. They were not yet building a new country. They were trying to defend old rights by acting together. That mattered. A scattered protest could be ignored, but colonies moving together became a political force. Outside Boston, local militias stored powder, watched roads, and drilled on village greens. On an April night in 1775, British troops marched toward Concord, passing through Lexington to seize military supplies. By morning, shots had been fired, men had fallen, and the road back to Boston became a running fight. The argument had left the pamphlet and entered the field. Still, independence was not automatic. Some colonists wanted reconciliation, others remained loyal to the crown, and others wondered whether rebellion could truly succeed. Merchants, farmers, printers, soldiers, loyalists, and patriot committees all experienced the crisis from different angles. The revolution was never one clean crowd moving in one direction. It was a struggle over legitimacy inside a divided society. The Second Continental Congress faced something almost impossible. It had to fight a war, speak for separate colonies, and become a government before a nation existed. In June 1775, Congress created the Continental Army and chose George Washington to command it. Washington gave the rebellion a single military face, but not an easy war. British power was real. Ships, money, trained soldiers, and an empire's reach. The Americans had local knowledge, printed arguments, stubborn politics, and an increasingly dangerous idea. If government drew its legitimacy from the consent of the governed, then distant rule without consent could be rejected. In early 1776, Thomas Paine's Common Sense pushed that case into plain language. For many readers, monarchy began to look less like tradition and more like a problem people had inherited. In July 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration was more than a goodbye to Britain. It made the case that the break was lawful, necessary, and humanly defensible. It turned complaints about taxes, troops, courts, and charters into a larger claim about rights. The colonies were no longer only resisting a policy, they were claiming the right to become states. Declaring independence was easier than surviving it. In New York, British forces pushed Washington's army into retreat. At times, the revolution didn't seem destiny. It was a cause trying not to scatter. Washington's winter attacks at Trenton and Princeton helped keep hope alive. The Americans did not need to conquer Britain. They needed to endure long enough for Britain to decide the empire was costing too much. At Saratoga in 1777, American forces forced the surrender of a British army under John Burgoyne. That victory changed the war's scale. France now had proof that the American cause might survive, and in 1778, it entered as an ally. Money, supplies, soldiers, and naval power turned a colonial rebellion into an international war. At Valley Forge, the Continental Army suffered through cold, hunger, and shortages. It also hardened into a more disciplined force. The revolution was fought with muskets and cannon, but also with patience, logistics, credit, diplomacy, and morale. That is less tidy than a heroic painting. It is also how wars are actually survived. In the South, the war became especially brutal. Patriot and loyalist neighbors fought in farms, forests, and small towns where the front line could run through a family. British strategy tried to rally loyalists and break the rebellion from below. American resistance kept bending without fully breaking. In 1781, the decisive campaign narrowed to a peninsula in Virginia. At Yorktown, Washington's army and French troops under Rochambeau pressed Cornwallis from land. French naval power closed the Chesapeake behind him. This was the hidden system of the Revolution made visible. A local rebellion survived because it learned to coordinate towns, colonies, armies, credit, foreign alliances, and time. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis's army surrendered. The treaty was still 2 years away, but Britain's clearest road to victory had closed. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris made British recognition official. What had once been colonies on an imperial map now stood as a country on its own. The revolution did not make the new country simple. The United States still had to build laws, settle loyalties, defend borders, and decide how a republic would actually govern itself. But the central achievement was now clear. It rejected the idea that political power could rule permanently from far away without consent. It gave the new nation a principle strong enough to begin with and demanding enough to keep testing it. The American Revolution was more than a war against a king. It was a test of whether ordinary communities could turn grievance into common action into independence, and independence into a government. A stamp, a harbor, a musket, a winter camp, a pamphlet, a French fleet, and a signed treaty all carried the same pressure. Who has the right to decide? The answer was powerful, practical, and unfinished. Power should answer to the people that it governs. And the story of America would begin there. From stamped paper to signed independence, you are always welcome here. At Illumentary,